All right. Well, thanks for sitting in the aisles and everything, guys. This is kind of crazy. Wow. Well, hey, Paul, you wrote this book, Quarter Life Calling. It's really good. I read it. And you know what? Why did you write this book? What prompted you to write this book?
Yeah, so I guess, what really prompted me to write this book was because when I was in my mid-20s, I faced a quarter life crisis.
Yeah.
I was at a place where I really didn't know where I was going with my life.
Yeah.
I felt like I was kind of purposeless.
Yeah.
And one day, my mentor actually said, Paul, do you realize that God has a calling on your life? And he gave me a few books that literally just changed my life. Because before, I thought about success in terms of maybe climbing up the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
It was about the job title. It was about how much money I make.
Yeah.
But through these books, I realized that success in God's definition is about faithful stewardship. And my job is to steward my calling that God has given me and to become the best version that God has created me to be instead of constantly comparing myself to other people.
Yeah.
So I realized that I wasn't the only person who was wrestling with these questions, and many of my friends were asking the same questions about their identity and purpose, and I just felt this inner urge, this kind of calling almost to feel like I need to help these people. I need to help my generation really ground themselves in who they are in Christ.
Awesome. Well, so for you, okay, let's talk about your quarter life crisis right now.
Yeah.
How did you go from a quarter life crisis to a quarter life calling?
Yeah.
And what kind of questions were you wrestling with in your crisis?
Yeah.
And what kind of answers you try to find in your calling?
Yeah, so I have to go back to when I was in college.
Yeah.
So I was a very driven person.
Okay.
I was one of those guys who had like this 10, 20-year strategic plan of my life.
Okay.
I was participating in all these extracurricular activities, the student government and all that, to really boost my resume. Mm-hmm. And I got into my dream job. So fresh out of college, I worked for Boeing. And I was making a lot of money.
Yeah.
I was working with senior leaders who were twice my age. Everything looked great on the surface.
Yeah.
But to be quite honest, I felt very miserable. I felt I wasn't satisfied with my life. I wasn't fulfilled.
Right.
And I thought this feeling would go away maybe after 3 months or 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
But a year goes by, and this feeling of this emptiness starts to just grow and bigger in my life. And I remember this one night, I didn't know what to do, so I just cried out to God, just kneeling down and saying, God, I don't know why I'm so unhappy. I don't know why I'm so unfulfilled.
Yeah.
I've done everything I can, but why do I feel so empty?
Yeah.
And I realized God was saying, Paul, you've been asking the wrong questions all your life. Because everything was about me in my life. It was about what kind of school I wanted to go to. It was what kind of job I wanted to have. It was about what kind of circle of friends that I wanted to belong to. And never once did I ask God, what is your plan for my life?
Yeah.
And I realized that was a kind of a turning point for me. And thanks to my mentor and through the books that I've been really studying on calling, I realized that I had to start finding my own calling and discover my unique design. God has created me with a purpose, and I have to really discover that. So that, I think, was a kind of big transition.
Great. You said a big word in there. You said calling, okay? So help demystify that word for us, okay? Because it feels like, as you say that, I'm thinking, wait, I have to find my calling? That feels really heavy. That feels like really far away. How do I do that in a practical way?
Sure. So, I think calling, simply stated, is God's personal invitation for me to work on His agenda by unleashing my unique design in ways that are eternally significant.
Ooh, that was nice.
So
you thought about that, huh?
Yes, for a bit.
Okay.
So your calling is not your job, because you can retire of your job, but you never can retire of your calling.
Yeah.
And what I like about this idea of calling and how maybe you can think about it is there's a primary general call and there is a secondary call. So the primary call is a universal call to everyone. It is really an invitation to be in a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? So it is not only the call to salvation, but it is also called to the Great Commandment, is the Great Commission. All of that turning into just every single day, I want to enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's a universal call. And there's a secondary call, which is very unique for each person. So these are the stations God has put. So for instance, you might be called to your vocation, but you're also called to your family.
Yeah.
And you're also called to your community and church. So balancing that is really just how you live your life and the tensions that you wrestle through. But I just wanted to say that a lot of people think calling is just for pastors. It's just for missionaries.
There you go.
But it's not. Actually, every single person has a calling and it's sacred. So unless you're signing up for a gig as a hitman, right? Or you're like, trying to become a photographer for a Playboy magazine or a drug dealer, most jobs actually you can honor God. Yeah. Whether as a mother, whether as a teacher, or whether as a bank loan officer, or accountant, or engineer, or business. Yeah. Anyways, these are ways you can really pursue your calling.
Okay, so you said in your really nice definition of it, something about our own design, unleashing my own design. How do I unleash my own design, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I always like the metaphor of an owner's manual. So whenever you want to look at a car or fix some type of equipment, you're going to look at an owner's manual, right? I believe that we have an owner's manual of our lives.
Yeah.
I call that your sweet spot. Okay. So imagine a Venn diagram of 4 key elements. There's your life story. Yeah. These are your, the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the things that happen in your life for a purpose. You got to study it, right? Yeah. And then there's your gifts, which is your giftedness and things that you not only enjoy doing, but you really like doing it as well. And there's all these, assessments like your Strengths Finder to really help figure that out. And then there's your personality, and this is your God-given wiring. Some people are extroverted, right? Some people are introverted. Some people are very organized, they like structure. Some people, they just like to improvise and they thrive in spontaneity, right? Yeah. So that's a key part of it. And lastly is your passion. And what I like to use the word your holy discontent, because I think it's more accurate. Because you can be passionate about a lot of things, right? But your holy discontent is this idea that when you look at this broken world, what aspect of it breaks your heart that you want to do something to change it? Right? So if I could all boil it down, for me, I feel like I'm really aligning myself with the work I do in my sweet spot, because my personality, I'm an ENFJ. I love developing people, my life story of just cross-cultural experience and being able to talk about my book in different cultures, my gift of, curating and learning, lifelong learning, and my passion for the emerging adults. And how, if you find the intersection of that, I think that's a place where you really are able to unleash your God-given design.
Right. That is a lot, right? And these 4 Venn diagrams, you could spend a lot of time just unpacking each of those 4, right? Just to find that sweet spot, right?
Yes.
What is a good way to just start? Where did you start, and how did you just go on that journey for yourself?
Honestly, the best way to start is to, first of all, do reflection. Introspective exercises. One question that I really like is this, that, if you were to write your own obituary, what would you write? It could be a very morbid idea, right? Because nobody really thinks about death, especially at this age, but everyone's gonna die. But how do I want to be remembered? Yeah. Why did God create me? And asking these questions, I think, is really a good way to start. But also, I think asking for feedback is a very powerful exercise. Because we all have blind spots. I have blind spots. But there are people in our lives that I call my personal board of directors. So it's just, people who are my coaches, my mentors, my parents, my best friends, who know me so well, more than maybe I do, that they say stuff in my life that's so true, and sometimes they challenge me as well, right? So constantly getting that feedback and journaling, I think, is a really very, very important practice.
Awesome. All right. Hey, Paul, we're going to take a time out, okay? We're going to invite our worship team to lead us in a reflection, and we're going to invite you guys to text in social media and questions. All the information will be on the screen right here. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you. All right, we're going to answer some of you guys' questions, okay? Here we go, Paul. You ready for this?
Yeah.
All right, here's our first question. Hello. You guys say hi back, Paul. Okay. Hello, could you elaborate a little on your holy discontent and how to discern whether that is from the Spirit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, so when we think about calling, and it's always not about you, actually. It's about God. It's about other people. And this idea of your holy discontent always has to do with something that is broken in this world a lot of times where you're trying to help fix that, right? So I think a big part of that is understanding, is this discontent I'm feeling because I just don't like it?
Yeah.
Or is it because there's something in my heart that is bothering me? For instance, let's say if you just go out of this building and you're going back home, walking back home, and in the middle of the road you see a homeless person.
Right.
Some people might just go walk by and they're just like, okay, I don't think about it. But there's some people who just walk by and they feel something in their heart.
Right.
Like, I need to help this person. For some reason, God has put that burden in your heart where maybe you can understand the pain for whatever reason. I think that is a signal that God has put in your heart, a desire, your holy discontent. And I think that's a big part of really asking God for discernment.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to understand that it's not just your passion, it's not about you, but it's about God's kingdom and needs of the world that you see.
Right. Does a holy discontent just happen like that? Or is that something that just develops over time as you explore other parts of your life too?
Exploration, experimentation, I think is a key part of that, right?
Yeah.
I think, a lot of times we think about trying to get into that one perfect job, one perfect thing, but especially in our 20s, it's all about exploring, purposeful exploration.
Yeah,
I think it's a key part of that. So evaluating, different experiences, different things that you explore, I think is all going to help you really understand what is moving my heart.
Great. Okay, here's another question, okay? How should we respond when God is pushing us in a different direction suddenly, but it's unclear where he wants us to go?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because this requires a lot of discernment, requires a lot of prayer. So first and foremost, what I would like to understand, somebody who asked this question is, when you say different direction, what does that really even mean?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's going to be really clear, really important to understand. And unclear where you want to go, right? So again, I think when we think about the will of God, we often think about it as a bullseye.
Right.
There's that one perfect thing, one perfect person to marry, or one perfect job to have, right? But actually, what I believe is God, if it's all about pursuing God's kingdom and his righteousness, then God gives us the ability to take a risk for him.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're going to have one job. Studies show that an average 20-something will have 7 different jobs just in their 20s.
Wow.
Right? So there's going to be a lot of changes for you, but the idea is this aligned with my calling, or am I just doing it because I just want to?
Yeah.
I think that's a big difference.
Well, here's a question then. For our college students here, right? We all have to choose a major. Right. Do you think we should choose a major toward our calling, or do you think we should choose a major toward our career? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it should be aligned with your calling, right? Because again, the definition, how I distinguish a job versus a career and calling, you're going to have maybe multiple different careers in your life, right? But is it aligned with your calling? That's very, very important. So for me, just to give an example, my calling is to equip and empower the next generation to really live out their God-given calling.
Yeah.
So if that is my calling, then how I do that could look very differently. For instance, I could be an author, like I wrote a book, and I could do that full time.
Right.
Or I could maybe pursue a PhD and maybe a professor.
Right.
And as a professor, I could live that, as my career. But it's, I think, important as you choose your major, don't think that you're going to continue with that major for the rest of your life. I studied HR. right?
Okay.
And now I'm doing something very different.
Right.
So again, knowing that, like, if you studied one topic, expect that God might use some of the things you learned, but it may not be in the same industry or same field.
Right. Okay, great. Here's another question, okay? What are common symptoms of not living according to your calling? Is it just unhappiness or something else?
Yeah, I think a common symptom is obsessive comparison disorder. I like to call it that. OCD, different type
your
of
own OCD.
OCD.
Okay.
I think it's really important because, we live in a social media world.
That's right.
And for me, even at night, sometimes I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed and I see all these people doing incredible things, traveling around the world, right? And I compare myself. I'm like, what am I doing right now? And oftentimes, I think when you're not living according to your calling, you constantly compare yourself and doubt yourself. Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Am I on the right path? Maybe I should be doing this. And that the FOMO comes in your life and it just dominates your life. And then you start to have this fear and you think that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. But I believe the grass is greener on the fence you water it, right?
Yeah,
so
good.
if that's your calling, you got to go into it.
Yeah, that's good. Grass is green. Okay, all right. Here's another question. Here's a tweet from Chrissy. Okay, she asks, once you define your personality, passion, and calling, how do you allow and encourage personal growth to happen in your weaknesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always believe that God uses your strength to unleash you to the place where God's called you. At the same time, because we're humans, God uses our weakness as well. So I think the key idea is to leverage and maximize on your strength, but mitigate on your weakness, right? But at the same time, I realize sometimes God uses your weakness to glorify God. So for me, to be very just open with you, I've never thought I would be doing public speaking for my career. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had a traumatic history of like public speaking growing up, and I just became like a phobia for me,
Okay.
But the fact that God uses my weakness sometimes glorifies God because I'm not here by my own strength. I cannot confess to you guys that I'm a great speaker, that I have this innate talent, but what God's given me is this story. And my job is to be God's messenger. And like Moses, he created my mouth. He could put words in my mouth and speak what God's put in my heart. And I think that's a key part of that is your weakness. Definitely you want to mitigate it, but also know that God's sometimes going to use that for his glory.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Here's another question. I have absolutely no idea what I want to do as a career calling, and I'm graduating very soon, maybe in 2 weeks. How can I handle this stress productively and begin to discover some kind of calling?
Yeah. So one thing that I want to tell is finding your calling, discovering your calling is a process. It's not just like a mathematical formula. I wish there was, because then many people could make a lot of money. Do these following steps, and you're just gonna like suddenly find your calling.
That's your calling, bro.
Set your life
what you're supposed to do.
So I think there's a framework. There's a guideline. So for people who are wrestling with this, I think it's a real thing.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say you're just entering you're entering your 20s.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of years to live, right? So think long term. And know that as you start to really discover, maybe this is how God designed me, right? Like the sweet spot idea that I share with you, that's gonna help you discover more about who you are. Yeah. And then through that process, you're gonna be able to know what type of steps to make. But I do wanna recognize that this idea that we have to get that right, perfect job immediately is so real. But it is very dangerous, I think, because again, there's going to be multiple different jobs and careers that you're going to go through your life.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that you seek the counsel of others to be able to go through that process.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that. The counsel of others and just how your gifts play out in a community setting, that's very important. That's really what helped me guide me on this path. My first job out of college was a consultant. Believe it or not. So there you go, okay? Here we go. Here's another question from Sam. She asks, you said to start discovering your calling with careful introspection, but also waiting for God to reveal it in us in time. Can you explain how those things can happen concurrently?
Yeah. It does definitely happen concurrently because discovering yourself takes time. And oftentimes, what I think for us to discover our calling is we have to unlearn a lot of things we learned.
Yeah.
There are things we've learned that are lies about who we are.
Yeah.
It's an identity issue. Things maybe happened in your past, your childhood experiences, or things that happen maybe some doubt or fear you have, and that defines who you are. So a lot of introspection through getting feedback from your personal board of directors or reading books or reading the Bible helps you to unlearn a lot of that and relearn what God really wants to teach you. So that's going to take time, and being able to then ask God to reveal to that in my life is very important. So for me, many people say, Paul, you had this great job at Boeing.
Right.
You quit your job to pursue your calling. So therefore, I have to quit my job too, right? Right? And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It took 4 years for me to actually quit my job.
Right.
It wasn't like, okay, I just don't like my job, so I'm just going to quit. It took 4 years of discernment. Really, like, is this really God, what you put in my heart? Can you please affirm me? And as I got feedback from one person in different areas of my life, it confirmed that this is the right time for me.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Great. Here's another question, okay? How do you decide between a career path that has always been expected of you and something that you feel deeply passionate about? Which should you choose and why?
Yeah, so I think, for me, I can relate to that question too, because I grew up in a very high expectation Asian American family.
Right.
And my parents had a plan for my life. And I was operating under the script of my parents instead of living my own life. And my dad was a very accomplished businessman, so I always thought I had to follow into my dad's footsteps and get into a top school and all that. But I realized that God created me differently than my parents. Mm. And to me, that was one of the difficult things of my life, is to say no to that expectation.
Oh man, that's hard.
Very hard.
For us especially.
Very, very hard, yes. Yeah. It took actually a few years to even convince my parents.
Oh, that's good. They let you go.
But it's really hard. So I say there are things that God has called you, and pursuing your calling, it sounds very glamorous, right? But oftentimes, it's very hard. It's going to require courage. Mm. It's going to require you to take a risk.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of that, is when you have that courage and pursue into the calling God's given you, you're going to really see what God's going to do in your life. It's going to be very different maybe than what you planned, but He's going to be leading your life in ways that just completely blows your mind.
Right, great, okay. Here's another question, okay. What would you say are some ways or tips to build a strong personal board of directors?
So I say, start with, first of all, the people you know. People you know, look for character first over competency. I think character is really what you need to look, especially in a very image-driven culture we live in.
Yeah.
It's easy to brand yourself. Easy to say you're an expert, you're all these different things, but there's a very few people who have the character.
That's good.
So I would look at those people who have the character in your life, who's able to speak truth, but in a loving way.
Yeah.
Right? So these could be really just your mentors, your coaches. These could be your parents or your friends, or your pastor maybe. People who have wisdom, and you want to know. You want to be around these people, right? So that's I think some qualities that you should look for.
Great. Okay. Here's another question, Paul. In addition to your book, what books do you recommend on calling? Talk about the thought behind the title of your own book.
Yeah, so I would say there are a lot of books on calling, but the book that literally changed my life as it comes to the paradigm of how I see calling is the book The Call by Os Guinness. It's actually a very hard book to read. a very thick book, and it's just it's not like it's for like theologians, I feel like.
Yeah.
But for me, I just read it, and I was like, I had to read it a couple times.
Yeah.
But it just helped me realize that I have a calling. That God created me for a purpose, and it was just so profound. So I think, for me, the title of my book, Quarter Life Calling, is so important because many people say in the world, in the culture today, your 30 is the new 20. You can do whatever you do with your 20s because now it takes a lot longer to grow up and just do whatever you want to do. I think that's a wrong message.
Yeah.
I don't think 30 is the new 20. I believe that your 20s is the time to confront your fears, confront all these things that you bought into, these lies, and step into who God created you to be and discover yourself early in the process, because I think you don't want to wait until you're in your midlife crisis, right? And at that point, it's a lot harder to pivot and change because you have not only yourself to take care of, but you have your children, you have your husband and wife, and you have all these other responsibilities.
Right.
So this is a time where many people, are single in their 20s, and this is a time for you to explore and experiment, and your quarter life crisis is going to really be an open door for you.
Great. All right, Paul. Hey, so one question we asked to close our chapel is for you to just help understand and explain what some of the biblical principles were that guided your thoughts today.
Whenever I think of calling, I go back to the biblical story of Elijah calling Elisha. So in 1 Kings 19, I love how it opens the story of Elisha, who is plowing his field behind this team of oxen, right? And Elijah comes and he puts a cloak around him, which is a gesture signifying a prophetic calling in ancient Israel. But what happens next is what just blows my mind, because Elisha, what he does is he basically responds to the call by hosting a giant, oxen barbecue party for the whole village, right?
Okay.
And he uses all the equipment he used for the plowing to create that. So he doesn't have no oxen anymore, no equipment. He can't go back, right? He went all in.
Right.
And like Elisha, when we go all in with our calling, that is probably the best decision that we'll ever make in our life, because you're going to see God doing some mighty works in your life. So my last words is really this. For anybody here who feels a sense of inner urge or calling, if you will, you need to face your fears. One of my mentors said, Paul, fear is an acronym for two things. It could mean forget everything and run, but it could also mean face everything and rise. And when you choose the latter, I believe that makes all the difference.
All right. Well, let's thank Paul for sharing his wisdom with us today.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.